Hello and welcome here from an empty and deserted ICA headquarters office. My name is Gerrit Heikoop and it's an honor that I can welcome you to this first ever interactive webinar, a global conversation on current challenges. And that is what we're going to do for the next 3 hours or so. Good evening to all of you in the Far East, Asia and Australia. Good afternoon to all of us here in Europe, in the Middle East and Gulf region and in Africa. And good morning to all of you in the Americas. We're very glad that you're joining us because that is what we can do. For those of you who watch us on Facebook or perhaps come across this video in recording, you're now hosted by ICA, the International Association for anyone who has to do anything with international association meetings. For the next 3 hours, we're going to do what we can do best, and that is come together virtually to explore, to learn, to be creative and inspire each other about what we can do to overcome or at least to be in this great global crisis together and see where we are, look after each other and move on. So in order to do so, it's important that you become interactive. It's a benefit to you. And to do so, I invite you all to open up your second screen. You can either do that by pulling out your mobile from your pocket, put it on your desk, or click on the link below the video player and the Slido application will open. And I have put a little poll there for you so we can see who's actually together in this room with us. There's 4 short questions. If you haven't done so, please feel free to take the time to fill that out right now. First question is, who are joining us and where are you from? So we can see we have about 70% of us, of the 80 people who responded are from Europe. We have some people from Asia, a few from Africa, and I guess people in the Americas still have to wake up. Love to see which countries are you from. As we can see, a lot of people from Germany and the Netherlands joining us. But basically, we're gathering people from all over the globe. And that is what this afternoon is for. And if you're just joining us, feel free to share the link. This interactive webinar is free. It's open to anyone, no registration, nothing involved. And we hope to bring together as many people as possible. Are you professionally involved in international association meetings? As said, ICA is the home for any professional who does that. And we see that over 80% of our audience this afternoon is doing that. And then let's see where people are joining us from. About 35% of the people from destination marketing, convention bureaus, meetings management, 25%. Also a lot of representatives from associations themselves and some of the other sectors as well. And let's see. Are we bringing together our ICA membership? Yes, we are. So welcome to you all, members of the ICA family. Please join us, be interactive. And I'd like to start with giving you a first homework assignment. At the end of each block, this afternoon is structured in 3 blocks, which start at the full hour. I'll put up a next Slido poll where I ask you, can you please share your main takeaways from this session? And if you take notes during the session, if you then submit your key takeaways, we will gather all the takeaways from this community here this afternoon and publish it back to you in the ICA Knowledge Hub, the place where we gather all the insight and all the latest knowledge about the international meetings industry. So please do that as well. If you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to comment over there as well. That works well. Now, before we move on to our key speaker that we have for this first segment about crisis communication, I'd like to first switch to our Chief Executive of ICA, Mr. Senthil Gopinath. Senthil, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Gerrit. How are you?
Good afternoon, Senthil. Glad to have you with us here today. It's an honor for you and us to be here together in the first Global ICA interactive webinar. Please, what do you have to say to our audience here tonight?
I mean, at the outset, looking at the poll, fantastic to see so many members of ICA taking the effort to join. One of the key components the messaging we have been sending to our members is communicate and collaborate. So I warmly welcome all of them. And I would like to welcome James Rees, ICA President, who's online. He's listening to our session as well. And many of ICA board members are online as well. And of course, to the ICA members globally. ICA being a true global organization, truly understands the difficult time faced by all our members globally. Very unprecedented times. We have never been in this situation. But on a positive note, we want to organize more global conversations, such as today's one. So we share knowledge, we communicate, we collaborate And there could be some best practices followed by our members globally, could be shared among each other. So that's the primary objective of this webinar.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for sharing those words with us, Senthil. Just on a personal note, how are you feeling at this moment in the midst of this global crisis?
I would keep it, yes, it's a very difficult situation. But from a global association point of view, one of the most biggest opportunity I face is that I could communicate to over 100 countries, to over 1,200 members worldwide. In fact, that's something I really look at as a great position to be in, and talking to them, offering assistance, help they want, the support they require. Most importantly, share their thoughts and what they are facing at the moment from a financial impact, or even from a personal point of view. Yes, I know everybody's working from home, but I keep engaging with them from early mornings to a late night in the evening with different time zones globally. So yeah, although I'm working from home, I'm enjoying, I feel like virtually I'm working worldwide.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for all the effort that you and the entire ICA team is putting into this. We've experienced that from close by in the last few days. I will be checking in with you at the end of this first block as well to see what your first reflections and insights are, and enjoy this interactive webinar with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerard.
Now, for those of you who just joined us, let me also highlight that the status of this online event is not that we pretend to know it all, to give you all the answers on either crisis communication, on legal and insurance issues, the theme of Block 2, or on the online alternatives for face-to-face meetings. The purpose of this meeting is to come together virtually, to hold each other virtually, and to share our questions, to share our first cases, insights, and stories, and to make us all connected and sit in this together, because that only will spark the creativity that we need to overcome this. And there's several ways you can do this. You can send in your questions to this little studio via the Slido tool, but you don't have to send in questions. You can also send your stories. You can send your remarks, your comments. Or if you don't have anything to say yourself, you can also use the thumbs up to push certain messages or questions to the top of the list, and we'll try to read them out. As I said, 3 blocks, 3 slightly different formats. The first block is on crisis communication, where it's more educational. It's an exploration or some of the key things you could consider and think about in the topic. The second block is much more interactive, where we'll have an interactive panel where we gather the stories from the different perspectives on what's happening right now. What's happening if you're running events for an association? What's happening when you're a PCO or an association management company? What's happening when you're a destination and all your events get cancelled? And then in the third block, it's a bit of a blend. It's a bit of education about online alternatives for face-to-face meetings, and it's also an interactive panel where we'll try to gather some stories, and definitely in the third block we're going to try to answer as much of your questions as we can. Now, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. Tina Altieri is a dynamic and passionate communicator who has earned respect throughout her 30 years in the Australian broadcasting industry. She is a television news presenter, a lifestyle program host, and a master of ceremonies at many business events, including the ICA Congresses. You might know her from that. She relishes the opportunity to work with leaders across the globe in crisis communication and dealing with the media, something that we all have to do at this moment. And she has also developed an exclusive, result-oriented communications program called Mastering the Media. Well, she's the founder and principal manager of her company Max Communicate, and she's currently joining us from Perth in Western Australia, where, Tina, as I understood, the borders have just been shut in a quasi-lockdown. Well, I'm glad we're here to bring you into this live broadcast virtually. Tina, I'm sure you've seen and you've been at the center of many crises throughout your career. How do you prepare people in business events for something like this, and can you?
Hi, Gerrit. It's lovely to see you, and great to be part of such an important event today. It's a good question. How do you prepare? And it's a hard one to answer because we are facing unprecedented times. It is about arming yourself with the very best possible strategies. One of the things I think that's really clear in these unprecedented times is that as we are sailing towards these very turbulent waters, it is a fine line that I'm finding between taking care to communicate necessary and important information while also preventing widespread panic. And I think that is really, really important to remember. People are looking, of course, right now, as Senthil has also just mentioned, for clear. They're looking for succinct messaging, concise messaging. And this is the time too when good communication is really vital. This is when it really counts. And as you know, we've been told to prepare for what we call the very long war against COVID-19. So starting now, preparing a flexible set of response modules is going to be really important for many of the people listening, and for you, and of course for the business. It's very interesting, isn't it, that it is so easy to be overwhelmed by the pace, the fury, if you like, of the initial onslaught of the problems and the unprecedented challenges now being faced worldwide. We know countries throughout the world are closing borders, temporarily unavailable or unable to accept travellers from key source markets. One of the things we always talk about in crisis communication is when an issue hits, the advice is always to take stock and plan forward for recovery, as this will be time well spent to really keep potential travellers and industry partners engaged for future recovery. Of course, the golden rule in any crisis is to start planning for recovery as soon as the crisis starts. And yes, that remains good advice. But dealing with this pandemic, some of those golden rules really don't go far enough to adequately deal with the magnitude of the situation that we're facing when it comes to communicating in this particular crisis. So what I've done is actually designed a specific toolkit, if you like, of more tailored strategies and tips that would be of use to you in this particular situation. So I wonder how many of you at the moment are dusting off your crisis communication plans and perhaps implementing this already. So I thought it would be a good idea, Gerrit, to start with taking a look at what is going on with those who are with us right now in the industry. And maybe it would be great for us to get a bit of a gauge, get a bit of a feel, and to tell us where you're at currently. So we have 3 questions for you, and we're going to use Slido right now to see your responses on these. Now, question number 1 we want to ask is, who believes that they had or still have a crisis media or communication plan to in place, if you like, to put into action to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic? And I want you to choose one of 3 options. Option A, yes, you feel completely and adequately prepared to deal with this because of an up-to-date crisis comms plan that you have in place. Or B, sort of, at least you have a plan that could be used, although perhaps you may not have laid eyes on it for maybe a couple of years, who knows, maybe. Option C, no. What do you mean that you need a crisis communication plan?
Exactly. And in the meantime, I've pushed the poll live. I see people are answering that, but I can imagine perhaps people on Facebook, because we're also streaming this live to Facebook. Welcome everybody on Facebook. If you're wondering how you can participate in the interactive polls and in the interactive Q&A or chat, in the description on the Facebook page, there's a little hyperlink. Open that link in either a second window on your screen or on your mobile or tablet second screen device, so you can in real time participate with all the different people who are joining us. And I can already tell you in the last poll, over 280 people participate. So we're really gathering an international crowd. And if you're watching this live stream on the icaworld.org page, there's a link right below where you can click, or you can do as well, just like in any other physical event, pull out your mobile phone, direct your mobile browser to slido.com and use the official hashtag ICA Global Conversations as an event code to get in. By now, Tina, I see that almost 200 people have voted already. Let me share you the results. The majority, 60% of them, actually chooses option B, sort of. At least I had some kind of plan that could be used. 30% are very honest with us and they're going for option C, saying, no, what do you mean I need a crisis communication plan? This is beyond magnitude, I think they think. And about 11% though, so that adds up to about 25 people, say, yes, I feel adequately prepared to deal with this because of an up-to-date crisis communication plans in place.
Fantastic. Wonderful. That's great. Let's go on to our second question.
Yes.
And question number 2 is, are you putting the crisis communication plan together as we speak? In other words, because the rules, well, there are no rules in place at the moment for something like this pandemic, unprecedented times, as we mentioned. Are you basically putting some crisis communication plans together this very moment? Option A is yes, option B is no.
Yeah, and
the emphasis
I
here,
added an option C, Tina. I said I'm done already, and that's for those 11% of the people who said they had a plan in place, were ready to go,
course.
right?
And I think, exactly, and I think the emphasis for this question is, even if you do have a plan in place, are you finding that you are still moulding it, massaging it to fit obviously the unusual circumstances that we're facing currently? So are you putting this plan together, and is it a work in progress?
Yeah, well, there's a clear sign here. 60% says yes, loud and clear blue bar here. About 27% says no. I wonder what that means. So either they're done or they're not working on it. Well, they're not done because 13% choose option C. I'm done already and I'm ready to execute my crisis communication plan.
Okay, that's great to know. For the majority who answered yes, I'm glad that there is a big group of you, because I'm going to give you some frameworks that you can at least start working on as you're currently putting this together. So that's it might be useful to you a little bit later. And question number 3, is there a place in your mind for crisis communication when the magnitude of this pandemic is overwhelming? Option A, I feel like no amount of communication or preparedness can help us right now. It's a hopeless situation at this stage of the crisis. If you honestly believe that, then let's press option A. Option B, yes, we should all be working hard to give ourselves a voice, because eventually we will be heard above the noise of this pandemic. Give you a moment now to have a bit of a think.
Yep. In the meantime, if people are still struggling, where are these polls taking place? It's on slido.com. You can either open that on a second browser window, so you can put it anywhere where you want it, next to or on top of or on your second screen. Or if you have a second device, mobile phone, tablet, anything, open your browser, slido.com, and use the event code #ICA Conversations, which is also the hashtag of this online gathering here this afternoon. So in the meantime, if you're done voting, and I see over 200 people have done so already, take the time to snap a little photo of you sitting anywhere around the world. And we see many comments from many people all around the globe, and we'd love to see who you are and where you're sitting and watching this from, and post that to either Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram using hashtag ICA Global Conversations. Well, the results are in, Tina, and we see an overwhelming 86% voting the yes. We should all be working hard to give ourselves a voice, because it will eventually be heard above all the noise of this pandemic. And only 14% chooses no.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know what, Gerrit? The reason I designed that question is because in the feedback that I am hearing from many corners of the meetings industry, from in my sort of fairly limited sphere in Southeast Asia, is that in the early stages it is a hopeless situation. How on earth can we be heard when there is so much information coming in, and it's so the pace with which we're receiving this information is just so hard and fast that it's hard to keep up, and therefore it's hard for us to even have a voice. But I am delighted to hear that many of our guests and people listening in and watching in today believe that we do need a voice. So my answer to that actually would be somewhere in between. Definitely not a hopeless situation, and yes, we do need a voice. How we get that voice is something that indeed we're going to start to develop, hopefully in the next hour. For those of you who've met me and I've had the pleasure of working with at the ICA Congress before, you'll know that I've always rammed home the message that often it is too late to start thinking about putting together your crisis communication plan when you are already in the crisis. It's simply too late. What I've noticed, however, over the years working with MICE industry leaders, many organisations have a business continuity plan, but don't necessarily have a crisis management plan. And of course, it's different. Let me reassure you, it is not too late to think about this in real time, provided that you're not paralysed by the problem. And of course, many companies have been paralysed, but it's not too late. In a crisis, we know that first impressions are absolutely everything. We'll take a look at the next slide. It's what we call in communication circles the rule of primary. The way you communicate early is paramount. And a perfect example of this, and that we're seeing this with governments and countries all around the world that were perhaps slow to react, even if their subsequent actions were solid or impactful, it won't count in the eyes of your audience because the actions would have been overshadowed by how sluggishly they stumbled out of the gate, so to speak. In other words, how poorly they reacted at the very start. And it's interesting, isn't it, that people will always remember how governments, companies, organisations or brands first reacted, their messaging at the start of the news of COVID-19. That is essentially what will stick more than anything. So I think that's a really interesting thing to remember. It's a good idea. Well, people have actually asked me right now, they've sort of said to me, is it a good idea to get proactive with our communication at this difficult time? The answer to that is actually yes, but how far do you go, especially as there are so many changes so quickly? So let me give you some tools to get started. Firstly, a couple of quick tips around social media during the crisis. We know that people are sensitive. They're panicked on many occasions. Their radars are on high alert. So make sure that you choose your social media lane really carefully. I want you to imagine the worst coronavirus news sitting right next to your post on Twitter or Facebook. So the question you've got to ask yourself before you post is, does this message sound insensitive or sound awkward? And if it does, you need to reconsider. Next up, it's all about adjusting the volume and the type of social media content as well. And it's a good idea to, trust your instinct right now. And the instinct is to give, how would you put it, additional care, if you like, to the empathy, to the tone of your social content right now. I do think that's really important. There's a little template that I ask my clients to consider, both in media training when I'm doing that and also in leadership and communication training. And it's this, take a look at this one. You should be asking yourself, should this be said? Should this be said by me? And should this be said by me now? And I think that's really important to remember. And it's often a very good template for you just to keep at the back of your mind when you are posting. And I've seen so many retractions in the last few days of where people have just gone out and done their usual social media marketing and only later realised how insensitive it was. And then to have to give an apology or a retraction really doesn't sit well with audiences right now. So it's very important to be so aware of the tone. It's confusing and frightening for so many brands and consumers right now. And there's no one correct way, if you like, of acting on social. The way consumers spend their time online over the next few months, we can definitely say, is going to be very unpredictable. over the next few months. Even if this means a significant increase in total time spent online, most companies, most brands will find it difficult to compete right now with breaking news. And I'm finding too that a lot of the people that I'm speaking with at the moment are finding it tough to communicate with employees. We've got to be getting this right first, with clarity, being concise, really important. So I'm sure that many of you are doing this, but let's just very quickly recap on this. Are you posting information regularly to employees, describing how decisions were made about issues? I think that's really important, like travel, working from home, communicating no less than every other day, trying to provide timely information rather than waiting until you have all the answers. I always tell people that if you're waiting to give information and you're sitting on information that everyone else is talking about, then you run the risk of leaving a vacuum that is likely to be filled by someone else who could be giving the wrong information or misinformation or information that's unhelpful or indeed unflattering to you or your company or your organisation. So I think that's something really important to remember as well. I talk about communicating like a CEO, just so that it helps you to remember the acronym. In this fast-moving and uncertain situation that we're finding ourselves in, many leaders face questions that they just don't have answers to. And if you're preparing your leaders to respond in this crisis, it's really important to remind them that they've got to communicate, the way I put it, like a CEO, concisely, early and often. Even if you're trying to understand the extent of the problem, be open, be honest, maintain that credibility, approach the situation with the big E word, of course, and that is empathy, in understanding people's anxiety. Early, understanding how you've got to be able to communicate early. That's the next thing that I'd like you to take a look at right here. And having a look there, if we just go to the next slide, by that we mean, are you, in other words, it's absolutely fine for you to be able to explain that you can't say everything so long as you speak up early in the crisis. I think that's what people don't get right a lot of the time. They're waiting for a complete picture before they decide to speak up about it. And then in the next one, I want you to think about communicating concisely, early and often. And it's okay to explain why you can't say anything extra at this time, to convey your good intentions repeatedly and convey your commitment to improving the situation, even if the situation is out of your hands. So I think that's just a very quick tip for you to keep in mind: concisely, speaking early as possible, and speaking often, even when you don't have the complete picture. You may get it right sometimes, and a lot of the time we get this wrong. We don't always get it right, but it's very important to be as transparent and as open as possible. And that's why I think thinking like and speaking like a CEO, concisely, early and often, really does pay dividends. There's a very big move at the moment, and you may have noticed in all of your different markets that video is a very good idea. And we'll just go back on that slide, but let me talk to you about video. And video is a good idea in communicating with your teams. I've recently helped some teams to produce 90-second videos. They are not slick, they are not overly produced, they're more raw, they're more real. They describe the current state of affairs, the steps being taken to protect people, what's being planned next and why. And I find that video is often received far more positively than a written email. So it's something you might want to consider. Let's move now to look at internal communication. What should you be communicating to your teams? Your concern and commitment. Here's what you should not be talking about. And we'll just go back to that other earlier slide. But here's what you should not be talking about. You shouldn't be talking about or rolling out your mission statement or your business mantra. People don't want to hear your regurgitated mission statement at the moment. And I'm seeing that a lot is coming through in company communications. Your commitment should be articulated in a much more specific way. Next, talking about your policies and procedures, focusing on business continuity and what solutions you're implementing to help customers and clients. When we talk about communicating externally, let's move now to the next slide. And you should be thinking through these steps. What happens if or when a confirmed case is established in your organisation? What do you say? Be ready to have that piece of narrative, if you like, ready to go, explaining in clear language the protocols. Next, how your business or company may be compromised and the steps you're taking to address this. Very important. Thirdly, what measures you've implemented, the steps you've taken, and what happens if, say, one of your high-level executives or certain members of your community are infected? And finally, what do you do if your organisation or your business is being blamed for infecting others for negligence? What do you say then? So I believe that part of your crisis communication plan has got to have as a basis some of these, if not all of these elements that it's important to include. And I think that's certainly something for you to think about going forward. There is a huge appetite right now for news, traditional media attracting huge numbers of viewers all around the world in all markets. It tells us then that there are some really good story opportunities available for you. There was a good story that I noticed probably a couple of weeks ago in Australia, where a large audiovisual company with dozens of employees was talking about having to basically close up shop and suspend their business because obviously all the mice business, the mice industry and the meetings business was just was being evaporated, if you like. And that story gave the mice industry, gave that as well as obviously that company, that AV company, a really strong voice. And I talked to them afterwards, actually, because I was very interested to see how that story came to pass. And this company had decided, in fact, to contact the news organisations, explain what was going on with them, and to talk about the amount of equipment that they had to decide what to do with, how many people were affected, and to talk about the meetings business really being in such dire situations as a result of COVID-19. And they also told me that after that story went to air and quite a few million people watched the story, they told me that they received an overwhelming response from people wanting to help or have some suggestions. So they created this really strong community because they were given a voice and they were proactive in getting that story up and out. So reaching out to speak to media is a really good thing to do at the moment. It's probably the last thing on your list, and it's probably the last concern that you would have. But when we're talking about how can you influence and how can you have a voice, it's really important to think about these opportunities. The question is too, are you ready for media inquiries if the media comes calling uninvited? And that's something important too. What are the tough questions that you might need to answer? Getting your facts right when you don't know the full or complete picture. And again, it's okay to say that you don't know, but the question is, are you ready? Should the media come to you and want to do a story? So you need to be ready. You need to be able to fight fear with facts as well. Keep reassuring your audiences with the facts. If you represent a destination, for example, be clear about recovered cases as well as live cases as well. Ensure you're communicating all across government and task force action about which is going into the country's recovery plans. So very important that you're keeping up to date with that sort of information. And then, of course, if you're dealing with media, not only do you have to worry about or think about the content and what you're going to say and your key messages, but of course, when it comes to the delivery, whether it's you delivering in that interview or whether you're preparing someone else to do the interview, it's got to be delivered with empathy, with transparency, with concern, and importantly, with a great level of care. So that's really important. This is where you should ensure that, you know, you've had up-to-date media training to deliver those key messages with credibility and conviction, and help each other out with that. The other element that I wanted to introduce very quickly is about what I call story acting versus storytelling. Now, it's understandable that people are panicked and paralysed, and we look to those really during these difficult times, who are the change makers and those who will really take action. So I want to encourage each of you and perhaps your companies to move on what I call story acting. And it's a point of difference to storytelling. Story acting is about capturing the actions that you're taking, what you are doing in this pandemic, how you and your company, maybe even your brand, is leading the way, whether it's leading the way in community health and well-being during these tough times. The thing you've got to ask yourself is, how are we acting as this story is unfolding? And that's where I believe that we should all be documenting what action we're taking. What are the outcomes of the actions, good, bad, or indifferent? Who cares? That's really important to document that as well. What emotional buttons have been pressed that show, that document that people really care about what you're doing as a company? In other words, what are the emotions attached to this? And again, I go back to, it's important to document it, even when you're receiving negative feedback, negative publicity. Put it in a journal and document it. It becomes, in my mind, a valuable resource, and it gives you and your company and your journey a very distinct narrative. And I think that's important to remember. There's also another element to story acting, and this is about your capacity, if you like, as a thought leader for your industry. And this is where we can all be documenting and capturing thoughts and insights around the way forward for your industry. And here are a few ideas that I wanted to capture for you to get your creative messaging going for story acting. What can you do for the future? Your predictions, your insights for what's going to be important beyond this pandemic. So using different headlines, for example, risk management will be elevated to top management concern. Just something that I wrote down because I thought, okay, this is something that we could potentially use for my, even in my crisis communication company. Other things you should be thinking about: new emphasis on stronger financial instruments and practices like meeting escrow, huge impact on survivability of smaller players throughout the industry. When it comes to meetings, my prediction, probably more roadshows rather than events, trying to attract delegates from multiple countries as a general trend, perhaps in the medium term. That's something as well to consider. Global meetings, maybe, some fighting to survive, or they'll evolve into multi-hub events. What does the meetings industry need to say to its members and key stakeholders going forward? No longer, I think, we'll be saying that all meetings are valuable, but we'll be saying much more frequently what meetings are essential. If you're in charge of a congress or convention centre, there'll be lots of opportunities to create brand new events to fill the vacuum. Then when you look at visas or freedom of movement and safe countries going forward, some countries will impose significantly tougher visa regimes, no doubt. That's something to consider. and of course how a country deals with COVID-19 will play such a major role in how it is perceived in future as a safe or indeed an unsafe country. So those are the headings that I've just put together in a little bit of a brainstorm that you might want to start with to help your story acting. Helps you to think more clearly about what action you've taken or the moves that you need to make or your predictions in order to progress through this challenging and unprecedented time. And I believe that documenting this will be really useful to you in the future, because what we do now, the lessons we learn, what we gain, capturing our thoughts, capturing our concerns and our fears, and sharing all of this that's emerged from almost an unthinkable scenario will determine how well we recover from this in the long run. And I think that's really important to remember. When we look at the getting to the other side and working on the recovery phase, just very briefly, think about how you can turn the spotlight and amplify local voices, reassure future travellers by highlighting those from source markets who are working in a particular destination. For example, if you're a New Zealand tourism organisation and you have a superb Japanese chef working in New Zealand, include their tips and guidance on your Japanese social media channels. When it comes to full recovery, and yes, I'm convinced we will be there, it will be a different landscape perhaps for a while, and probably it'll be a hard fight as well for audiences. So once the crisis is clearly over, there will be a full recovery period where all travellers are being targeted by brands and countries that are eager to open their doors. And this is the period that we know will be the most competitive the travel industry has ever known, as countries and as brands look to build back their economies and their cash flows as well. But it will also be undoubtedly a different industry, and that's generally the consensus that I'm hearing out there. While many businesses will go under some really tough times, the full recovery period will see this emergence of new, nimble players looking to take advantage of these changes. So now is the time that we need to start preparing in detail for the phase when you don't know the timing of your recovery plan. So what events might you create? What marketing will you implement? Have creative campaigns at the ready, which could even be trialed digitally and switched on quickly, using this time to review how to build a sustainable recovery strategy which builds back audiences but mitigates negative impacts. In my recent talks with industry leaders, I get a clear message that tourist boards which spend time planning destination management recovery strategies rather than destination marketing strategies in isolation will actually deliver genuine long-term results to their countries. So I think that's important to remember too, and that's what I'm hearing out there. So yes, we do have a lot to look forward to. Every hour is changing. That's one thing that we know right now. Every hour changes and provides us with new things that we're learning, surprising, worrying information. And this is really your chance to lead as an industry, and it's your turn to rise to the challenge with what I always call calm, considered, composed, clear messaging, because communication is everything right now, the way I see it, in the way that our leaders are influential in getting people to do as they say. That's where communication is so important. So much is at stake, and to ignore the power of communication, to ignore the power of influence is really... in my mind, it's dangerous. So having that recovery plan is really important. And we've always got to remember this, that crises are inevitable, but leaders are made or destroyed, as they say, by the way they handle them. So this is really our opportunity to step up and as an industry to really shine. And like I said, in these turbulent times, this is a great opportunity to do just that.
Wow. Thank you very much, Tina Altieri. This was a very powerful introduction and your thoughts on, and some very practical key pointers of what we should do. Thank you very much for preparing this for us, both on the high strategic level, the importance of having the communication plans together, and the very practical pointers. As I see, for those of you who joined us later, there's a lively chat going on because that's the aim of today. We're not going to pretend that we're going to solve all your crisis communication issues here in 45 minutes. The aim of today is come together, to feel together, and to exchange ideas. Well, Tina, you just kicked that off brilliantly. If we have time, I'd like to address one question to you. That is that I came to see through the chat a few times. It has received some likes as well. You stressed the importance of communicating like a CEO and being very sensitive and delicate and review whether messaging should be yours. Now, Eduardo Chayo is sending in the question, how can you strike the balance between the need for business continuity, which is obviously that we're all fearful from, and but where's the balance between sensitive communication? And I also like you to comment on that. We see a lot of members in our industry currently talking about don't cancel, just postpone. Is that the right type of response, or should we even back off from that? And what is your comment on that?
I think that your audience now realizes that you can't be very direct, and you can't say with complete authority that something is going to happen in a few months' time. I think your audiences completely understand that. So I think for every situation it's different. You might have to say whether it's been postponed or whether indeed it's just suspended or cancelled. I think it's important to be able to say that we just don't know when this is planning to go ahead, but we're working hard to move forward and to give you the latest information about when this is going on. So every situation is so different, but I think the most important thing is to realise that everybody understands that it is difficult to say unequivocally that this should be progressing at a certain time, simply because the landscape is changing as we speak.
Yeah, exactly. And also, since we're dealing with a very international crowd here, if I'm scrolling through the chat, we see shout outs from all over the world. Thank you very much for doing that, and keep doing that, because then at least we all understand that you might be sitting alone behind your own laptop somewhere in the world, but we are also sitting behind that laptop here together. Last question, Tina, if time permits. You already mentioned it's very noisy out there and there's a lot of news all the time. So is there any advice, if anything, what can companies in the meetings industry do to avoid the spread of misinformation and fake news, specifically also about our industry at this moment?
It's a good question about fake news. I think one thing that's really important is that you have to be ready to defend and counter this. And it can be really damaging, very damaging. And as I mentioned earlier, the first round of stories with any particular crises, that first round of stories is what sticks. And if that first round is based on fake news or news that's misguided, then it's very difficult to make up the truth and to establish the truth. So I think companies have got to begin to factor reality distortion techniques into their crisis communication scenarios and planning, to prepare and equip their executives to communicate the facts quickly. That's always to be on the front foot, as we mentioned, and to correct those fabrications or that misinformation before they spread. So really, again, just about being on the front foot as much as possible.
So, but would you recommend this is also always a reactive action? So you monitor very closely in case you see something that is obviously fake or incorrect. That is the time when you come with the facts?
Yes, I mean, and there's a balance, isn't there? Whether you wait and hold back for that news to become front and centre, or whether you just wait to see if it passes you by. I think in every scenario it is different, but most of the time you will see if indeed that fake news is gaining traction, whether that fake news is it can be heard or is starting to roar and starting to sound a bit louder. But again, it is about understanding that you need to be out there, and if something is or someone is saying something that involves you, you really need to help fill that vacuum.
Exactly. Well, Tina, thank you very much for adding these very practical tips here in the end. In the meantime, I'm going to try to see if we can Senthil Gopinath, ICA's Chief Executive, back with us. Yes, Senthil, there you are already. To all our viewers, I've just opened up the Slido poll, which might be the most important one throughout the three different building blocks, asking you what are your most important takeaways from this session? Because if we collectively scribe the key takeaways and we share those on the ICA Knowledge Hub, then hopefully we all come smarter out of this. Senthil, you've been joining us from the start. You've been listening in. What is your first reflection when you listen to Tina?
I think just a comment there. It's amazing to see the kind of feedback from the members. One of the key rules what Tina mentioned is rule of primary is communicate early. Yes, we are in one of the most difficult situations in the modern history. We have never been in this position from the time we all remember or we all born here. So I think it's very vital to be upfront, communicate early. Most importantly, going back, we as ICA family, the global community is very powerful, very strong. Like I said earlier, it's very important to see, communicate and collaborate. I think it's good to see we all compete with, as destinations compete with each other, venues compete with each other, but now is the time to see what the colleagues are doing, what other regions are doing. So it's very important to communicate and collaborate. Also, like Tina mentioned, very importantly, the risk instruments. What are the risk instruments available or the financial instruments available in your own destinations? I think very important to identify that first to see how I can use in these difficult times so that becomes in handy. More importantly, a good question by Eduardo about postponement. I think postponement, in our opinion, is a platform for recovery. So it's very vital for us to give that message globally to see, yes, we keep moving forward. Yes, we live on a day-to-day basis currently, but it's good to see that postponement send a positive image saying that, yes, some recovery is coming up sooner. So we are working towards it. So yeah, it's a combination of these aspects, I think, really put us on the map again very soon.
Well, thank you for these closing words, Senthil. Stay tuned because I will see you back soon when we kickstart the second block. This is, and I guess I mainly say this for our viewers who watch this in recording or our viewers who watch this in Facebook. For all of you who watch this live stream on the ICA World page, stay tuned because we're going to soon start the second block. Thank you for watching this far. Keep sharing your stories and practices with us. I'm really proud when I see my eye on the screen. I see all your takeaways that you're sharing with us. More than 80 people have submitted that. And please also feel free to share your key learnings and takeaways with hashtag ICA Global Conversations, either on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter. So more and more people can reel in and join us all together here online, either today or in the next few days, weeks, and months. So together we can share insights, be creative, and overcome this amazing challenge. We are we're closing off this first block right now. We're looking forward to welcome you in about 8 minutes for the second block. So this is the time to quickly get a fresh drink, maybe do some bathroom breaks, and I'll see you back at the top of the hour.